I'm Kathleen Henderson from Roots and Boots, and today I'm going to show you how to make butter in the food processor from raw milk. So the first step is to use a turkey baster or a small ladle to remove this cream from the top of the milk. And to get the cream to rise to the top, you want to let it sit in the refrigerator for about 24 hours. So now I'm using this baster to remove the cream and add it to my food processor, which is what I will use to churn the butter. And one tip when you're using a turkey baster or a ladle is to avoid siphoning milk from below the cream line or dipping down into it with your ladle. Sometimes with the baster, I like to kind of move it in a circular direction while I draw up the cream to try to avoid the milk below the cream line. It's kind of inevitable to get some milk with the cream, but just do your best to shoot for mostly cream. And then I will stop here in a minute. I leave a little bit of cream on the top so that I don't get too close to the milk line, and also to keep the milk creamier. Since I'm removing a good part of the cream, I'm going to leave just a little bit of cream, whether we're going to drink the milk or use it to make cheese. So I think I'm going to try to get a little bit more. All right. I now have all of my cream in the food processor. I was working with 2 gallons of milk. We belong to a herd share and we get 1 gallon of milk per week, but sometimes they have extra milk that they make available, and so that's why I have the plastic jugs here. That's how the extra milk comes to us. So I had 1 gallon and then 2 gallons, and that is how much cream I was able to draw, and I'm going to churn that into butter using the food processor. I literally just turned the food processor on and let it do its thing for a little while until I start to see the solids separating from the liquid. Okay, I'm actually making chocolate milk over here now with the skimmed milk, but I wanted you to see how those solids are starting to separate from the liquids. Now this is more like whipped cream, so I'm going to let it continue to churn until I actually have a liquid separating out from the solid. Now you can see a clear line between the solids at the bottom and the liquid on the top, so we're just about ready to strain out the buttermilk. And this is what it looks like inside. So now you can see they're kind of like grains of the yellow butter inside the white liquid, which will be the buttermilk that we will strain away from the butter. Okay, now that my butter solids are ready, I'm just going to pour this through the fine mesh strainer to collect the buttermilk in this measuring cup and leave the butter in the strainer. So now I have the butter and I have the buttermilk. Okay, so the next step is to press the butter gently, and you're kind of working it into a ball or a mass, and you're squeezing out all the liquid, which is buttermilk. The more liquid you can get out of the butter, the fresher the butter will stay for longer. If too much liquid remains in the butter, then it can spoil more quickly. So the next step is to rinse the butter in cold water. You have 2 options for this. If your tap water gets really cold, you can do it just like this right in the sink, or you can fill a bowl with ice water, like actually put ice in the bowl, cover it with water. My tip for that is just to make sure that you choose a bowl that's large enough to accommodate your whole strainer. Not all of my bowls work for that purpose. So then you're just gonna rinse it however you choose in the cold water. Scrape this off. I do find it helpful to use a metal spoon, a stronger spoon than my silicone spatula, to continue pressing any liquid out. And by liquid, I mean the buttermilk. So yes, am I gonna lose a few drops of buttermilk down the sink? Probably, but I try to get out as much buttermilk as I can to save it, and then I don't worry about the last little bits. And you can kind of, after you do this a few times, you can get the hang of recognizing, like, the liquid that looks very white is the buttermilk, as opposed to the clear liquid, which is the water that you're using to rinse it with. And I'm honestly probably not great at like removing all of the buttermilk. I can still see some coming out here. But if I were making large amounts of butter, I would probably go to greater lengths to make sure I'm getting out all of that liquid. But because I only make it in small quantities like this, we are able to eat the butter up before that liquid causes any problems with the butter spoiling. So you just kind of press and rinse until you feel like you've gotten as much liquid out as you can, keeping the butter cold with the cold water. Okay, now that I've pressed and rinsed my butter, I am going to transfer it to a container, and I'm going to add salt. I like to scrape as much of the butter out of here as I can. Okay, so I've got my butter in here, and sometimes at this point I like to do a little more pressing when I don't have to worry about squeezing the butter through the strainer if I press too hard, and pour out more liquid. Okay, that's probably good enough. And now we're gonna salt it. So this is entirely subjective. There actually are no guidelines for how much salt butter makers are supposed to add. So if you buy salted butter at the store, it's not like there's a real standard for how much salt is in that butter, which is kind of interesting. But when you make it yourself, you have total control over that, so you don't have to salt it if you don't want to. We, at my house, use our homemade butter for spreading on sourdough bread and other yummy things like that. So I do want salt in this butter. If I were going to use this butter for like baking, I probably wouldn't salt it, but it's up to you. And again, you can kind of add it to taste. We do like it on the salty side. I've never measured it. I just kind of sprinkle and mix. And as I'm doing this, I'm also pressing out a little more liquid, so whenever I see, whenever I see some liquid, I pour that out, preferably without splashing myself like I just did. Okay, so that's really it. And now you have butter. You can store it out on the counter if you're gonna eat it, you know, relatively soon, in a few days. Or you can store it in the fridge. Obviously, if you store it in the fridge, it will be less spreadable. So that is how to make homemade butter.